to first of all say thank you and welcome to today's press conference concerning the report that has been released from the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. I think this is a very, very important day for the state of Oklahoma for several reasons. I want to tell you all that what started out as a comprehensive corrections reform initiative has actually developed into a comprehensive safety plan for our state. We know that in Oklahoma, even given all the tough talk and all the increase in spending, our violent crime rate has relatively remained unchanged, while the rest of the nation has experienced a 20% decrease in violent crime rate. We know that by doing nothing, our current path is unsustainable. If we do nothing, we can expect that our violent crime rate will continue to increase, that thousands of people will continue to be unsupervised, individuals that have committed crimes and been convicted of felonies, and also that our state spending will increase by about $259 million over the course of the next 10 years. And so through the process of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, the Council of State Governments, and our working group, we've dug deep, very deep, and it's been a very intense process to really begin to understand what we can do to effectively utilize the resources that are at our disposal in an effort to reduce crime and increase public safety. This plan proposes to reduce the violent crime rate in Oklahoma by 10% by the year 2016. It also proposes to provide supervision for all post-prison felons. And it also proposes to contain prison costs in the next 10 years. We believe that if these proposals are implemented, the state of Oklahoma could save $250 million over the next 10 years. And we could see an increase in our public safety as well. The policy recommendations are tough, they're smart, they're strategic, and they're fiscally sustainable, which is important to our state. And because this plan proposes to increase public safety, and because it is fiscally responsible, we believe that it's also pro-growth. We think that it speaks directly to our quality of life in the state of Oklahoma, and it also gives us a better opportunity to reach our potential in job creation and in job growth, which we also think is very, very important. I want to be very clear that the real work begins now. This report is simply a proposal that now the legislature will have to decide what to do with. We will begin immediately drafting legislation to implement as many of these proposals as we can in a way that fits our state, in a way that is manageable, in a way that makes a tangible difference. I want to say a special word of thank you to Andrew Bedesworth and our team from the Council of State Government, the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. In my estimation, this group of individuals are among the best and brightest in the entire nation. And it's been an honor to have them working with us here in Oklahoma. I also would like to say a special word of thank you to our working group, everyone that is here today, and many who, because of schedule conflicts, could not be here today. You put in hours of your own time and dedicated your energy and put forth your best effort to make sure that we had a report that truly is going to make a difference for generations to come. So I want to say thank you personally to each and every one of you, and also a special word of appreciation to our co-chairman, Mr. Don Milliken, who I'd like to introduce to come and make some remarks at this time. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to really express my thanks, though, to you, Speaker Steele, for the courage to take up a subject that is both crucially important to the future of this state, but also one that is enormously challenging. Oklahoma Christian University has been privileged to be a part of this effort that began in earnest with the Corrections Summit that was held at Oklahoma Christian 2 years ago. Since that time, with the leadership of Speaker Steele and his colleagues, significant progress has been made. With the Justice Reinvestment Initiative this fall being the most comprehensive look at the statewide approach to public safety and corrections that has ever been done in this state. The data tells us that our own statistics and trends are not good. And that absent action taken, our incidence of violent crime and our spending on prisons will grow significantly over the next decade. Truly, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The data does tell us that there are things that we can do better, things that we can do differently if funds are available that will reduce violent crime, that will reduce the number of people who return to prison, that will reduce the number of people who fail in their diversion programs and ultimately are then sent to prison. From a business standpoint, it makes sense to me to devote more funds to efforts that will lead to a slower growth in the prison population, that is, less crime, and to pay for those efforts with the savings that will result in prison costs. From a Christian perspective, speaking as board chair of Oklahoma Christian University, I see great value in improving the safety of our citizens by reducing violent crime. But I also see the great value in lives and families and children being redeemed from the recurring cycle of crime and imprisonment. I want to now turn the podium over to Marshall Clements with the Justice Center, State Government, the Council of State Governments, to discuss the report and the recommendations.
Good morning. Thank you, Speaker Steele, Don Milton, for providing your leadership and co-chairing the interbranch bipartisan Justice Reinvestment Working Group, which has guided this effort over the past 7 months. I also want to thank Director Jones for opening up the Department of Corrections data systems and his staff and providing tireless assistance to this effort throughout the process. And I also want to recognize Suzanne McLean-Atwood and Trent Babbitt from the District Attorney's Council for the time they've spent with us over the last 7 months, convening 6 district attorneys from across the state for 6 lengthy meetings to discuss the data and the implications. 7 months ago, we stood before you as the Governor, Chief Justice, Senate President, and Speaker, kicked off this effort. And since then, we have done a lot of work. We've analyzed over 700,000 individual data records across state and local criminal justice agencies. We've consulted and met with over 350 individuals across the state in more than 100 in-person meetings that involved law enforcement officials, district attorneys, the defense bar, treatment providers, judges, victim advocates, community leaders, business leaders, probation officers, and the parole board. We joined police officers in ride-alongs in Oklahoma City and spoken with prisoners about why they're opting out of the parole process. And we started this effort, as has been noted, by focusing on analyzing the correction system. But along the way, as we spoke to those on the front lines of the system, we found that the challenges Oklahoma faces are much broader. And so today we are pleased to present the final report that summarizes the analysis and discussions of the Justice Reinvestment Working Group. Offers 11 policy options organized into a 3-part policy framework for Oklahoma policymakers to consider. The report describes 3 challenges facing the state. First, that despite enacting policies that lengthen sentences on the worst offenders and increased spending over 30% over the last decade, your violent crime rate is high and has remained relatively unchanged since 2000. And during the same time period, we see the number of violent crimes nationally and in most other states falling. In the urban areas, violent crime rates have actually increased, while in those same areas, the number of law enforcement staff per capita has actually declined to deal with these crimes. The second challenge revolves around supervision. Many more people are now exiting prison today to no supervision whatsoever than was the case just 5 years ago. And increasingly, we find when we talk to supervision staff that there's not the treatment access, treatment services needed to keep them drug and alcohol free. And then finally, we know that if current policies remain unchanged, the prison population will continue to grow. The state will need to expand prison capacity at a significant cost to taxpayers because of policies already enacted on the books. Unless policymakers take action, they can expect three things to continue. Crime rates will likely remain unchanged as they have over the last 10 years. Thousands of people will continue being released unsupervised, including high-risk and violent offenders that we know are rearrested at high rates. And state spending on prisons will increase by more than $250 billion over the next decade. That is the path you are currently on. That is the path you will be on unless policymakers take action. The policy framework outlined in this report pursues the following objectives to avoid this trend. It proposes setting a target of reducing violent crime rates statewide by 10% by 2016, and doing this by providing local law enforcement agencies across the state with the tools and resources we know have been proven, are data-driven, policing strategies that can actually deter and prevent violent crime. Second, set a goal of holding offenders more accountable by requiring everyone to serve a period of time on supervision and increasing resources to reduce recidivism. Without treatment services in place in a timely fashion, it's hard to hold offenders accountable for remaining drug and alcohol free. And then finally, to set a goal of slowing the growth of the prison population in order to contain spending. As a package, the policies described in the report can generate significant savings. By averting growth in the prison population between fiscal year 13 and fiscal year 21, the approach avoids an estimated $249 million in additional spending that would otherwise be needed to accommodate growth in the population. Out of those averted costs, policies require that the state reinvest $110 million over the next 9 years in local law enforcement, victim witness services, improving probation, and expanding access to treatment for those under supervision. We look forward to sharing this report with state policymakers in the weeks and months to come and providing any further assistance that the state may find useful as the legislature discusses these issues in the future. Thank you very much.
Again, I just want to ask that you all would take the time to read the report. There's some really important, very important information in there, and I think that you'll find the report very helpful. I want to say that at this point, I feel like we've already been successful in our endeavors. And I would just point out that normally, and our JRI team has been active in at least 16 other states. Normally, this part of the process takes about 18 months, and we said, we don't have that kind of time. Can you speed it up? And so they condensed it to 7 months, and we've been successful. And again, it's because of the dedication of these individuals that are standing with me and many more. At this time, I think I'd like to open it to questions, and if it's a specific policy question, we can defer to Marshall or one of our JRI team members. Pat?
Yeah, I just have a kind of a technical question on determinate sentencing, which is kind of an old terminology, I realize. Is this on the back end in the prison population, is this a variation on determinate sentencing? And if it is there a way to contain or curb wide variation in the way individual judges might treat an offender who's made progress or not? Do you understand the nature of the question? What I'm driving at?
I believe so.
Okay.
That is not an issue we looked at in terms of talking about fundamental shift.
Well, the 85% is what makes me think. You know, that's your benchmark, and then you vary from that based on how they perform in the system, correct?
Well, this policy framework requires the 85% policy to remain in place. It's a policy choice that's been made and contributes to growth in your population, but this policy framework does not alter it. Instead, reinforces that policy by ensuring that folks who are the worst offenders that are in that category will serve the full 85% of policy. It does allow for, after that 85% of time has been served, for their behavior throughout their period of incarceration to affect when they are released.
Okay, I'll read it. Thanks.
If I may, Pat, just to underscore, because there is a reform, I think it's 3B in your report. It speaks to the situation currently in Oklahoma a person who has been convicted and sentenced to an 85% crime is not even allowed to earn good credit until they've served at least 85% of their sentence. And so in reality, what is happening today, as I understand it, is that no one who is convicted of an 85% crime is even eligible to be released until they serve 92% of that sentence. And so the proposal change, or the proposed change, is to allow those 85% individuals to begin banking good credit time from the time that they're incarcerated, so that they potentially could be eligible for supervision at the end of their 85%. But to be clear, we were very, very intentional about ensuring that those individuals who would be convicted of an 85% crime serve 85%, at least 85% of their sentence.
Well, and that's my question, is that in this thing, you actually had that it's gone from 10 crimes up to 25 crimes over the past 10 years, 11 years. Why not remove some of those crimes, or remove the 85% law completely and allow for judges to make their own decision?
Well, the decision is a great question, and the decision was made that when it comes to what Chris Steele would classify as sentencing reform, any modification that would take place potentially through legislation would involve what we would consider low-risk, nonviolent offenses. And that is because we believe that it's very important that we have safe neighborhoods, safe communities, safe streets. And for those individuals who truly pose a threat to public safety or a danger to society, we believe that they ought to be separated and removed. But we need to make sure that we have the resources and the space available then to deal with those individuals. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of the proposals focusing on treatment and prevention and education and training for those low-risk, nonviolent offenders.
Mr. Speaker, do you think that it'd be difficult, legislators, it's election year, and legislation passed and all these tough on crime, and especially in Oklahoma, conservative state, do you think you can get legislators, your caucus especially, to get behind this?
Michael, it's a great question, and I would tell you this proposal increases public safety. And I would say that both bodies, both caucuses, value public safety as a core function of state government. And so I believe that if there's a way to utilize the resources that we have available to us more effectively in an effort to increase public safety, I think that there's going to be broad-based support for that, not to mention that this plan is also fiscally conservative.
Mr. Speaker, last year, Terry White released a plan that was the Smart on Crime plan to called for several similar changes that you have in it. How much of that is important, if any, is incorporated in this report?
You know, I would be happy to defer to Commissioner White. I would tell you as she comes forward, please come. After I say that I'm going to defer to her, I'm going to go ahead and answer the question.
You go right ahead.
And just say that it's one of the two tangible proposals is to increase treatment services throughout the state of Oklahoma, as well as increasing what we would call crisis centers for those who may be dealing with a mental health issue. And Commissioner White can speak to how her plan meshes with this plan and what may be similar or what may be different.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. The Smart on Crime Initiative that was a proposal of the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, as well as being endorsed by the District Attorney's Council, the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs of Police, the Oklahoma Turning Point Council, and the State Academy. There are portions of the Smart on Crime proposal that have actually been incorporated into the proposal going forward. Not the full proposal, but there are portions. Specifically, the portions that are in there, as you'll see when you look at the reinvestment dollars, over the course of several years, there's an investment of about $34.5 million, if I remember, and I might get the number just a tad off, but about $34.5 million into treatment services. Those would be encompassed in the Smart on Crime proposal. There's also $8.5 million set aside for screening. In the original Smart on Crime proposal, there is a proposal to screen anybody who comes into the jail for mental health and substance abuse needs. This screening proposal is actually an enhanced screening proposal, something that the JRRI team put together that's not just a mental health and substance abuse screening, but also a risk assessment screening, so that we would know if the person being screened is a higher, medium, or low risk offender, so that's part of it. The other piece that is in this that is highly recommended, although there aren't dollars set aside for it, there is incorporated into the Smart on Crime proposal basically a response of the call of law enforcement and what we know is a huge need in the community for more local community crisis centers, because law enforcement currently today is having to drive sometimes hundreds of miles to find a treatment bed for someone. We are proposing 5 new crisis centers in the state, the total, along with an urgent care component tied into that crisis system, so that people can be diverted from ever entering the criminal justice system. Those 5 crisis centers have a price tag of about $15 million. They are part of the Smart on Crime proposal. They're highly recommended in this, but there's not funding set aside in this particular initiative for that.
Could those be local initiatives that could blend with the state plan division?
When you say local initiatives, I'm not sure I know what you mean. These would be centers that are locally dispersed throughout the state, the 5 centers being obviously north, south, east, and west, trying to get local services back to the community so that law enforcement has something closer to them right at their fingertips where they can get people.
I mean, locally financed.
No, they would actually be funded through the department. If this were to happen, it'd be funded through the legislature, through the department, but they would be delivered by local community providers through a contract.
Under your 9-month sentencing or 9-month supervision recommendation, would that be retroactive? And if so, would that create a legal quagmire for the state?
It's a great question. It cannot be applied, as we understand, retroactively. We have to be applied prospectively because it would be a part of everyone's sentence going forward.
Can you compare this to Texas as a broad proposition, what is being proposed here, to the progress that's been made in the last half-decade in Texas?
Sure. In Texas, policymakers underwent a similar effort to really understand why their prison population was growing and what were some things they could do to improve the cost effectiveness of that system. The types of policies in particular focus on improving how the state responds to people who are on probation supervision, how we respond to violations that may occur, drug use or other violations of the conditions of their probation supervision. A lot of the changes in Texas, including the expansion of what in Texas is called an intermediate sanction facility, is a major part of this proposal, option D. In part, it's about responding more swiftly and certainly when offenders violate the conditions, but doing so in a way that's much more productive than what's happening and also more cost effective.
Well, you have it down as $110 million over the next 10 years. What, is that $11 million a year? Is that a larger amount in 2013? Is that, how much money is needed in 2013?
Page 4 of the report outlines the reinvestment details. Because these policies will take time to implement, should they be adopted by the legislature, because the needs in terms of reinvestment will take time to approve. It's suggested a $6 million investment in fiscal year 13 in these various reinvestment areas, increasing that to $13 million in fiscal year 14 and each year thereafter. And so we get to the 9-year total.
Mr. Speaker, how do you fund $110 million over 10 years framed against calls for continually reducing the tax revenue in the state?
If I understand your question correctly, let me answer it this way. Scott, if I don't quite answer it, ask it again. So I'll make sure that and I know you will. So let me make sure that I answer your question. First and foremost, reinvesting $110 million over the course of 10 years, you have to weigh that against potentially saving or redirecting, identifying $250 million worth of cost savings through these reforms. And so it's not, and I want to be very clear about this, it's not that we want to necessarily take money away from public safety or from corrections, because we believe that is a core function of government. It's that we want to use our resources wisely and effectively in a way that makes a tangible difference. That being said, when we're having a discussion about tax reform, we've made it very clear, I've tried to be very, very clear, that as we consider various proposals to reform our tax structure, we want to ensure that we are still able to adequately fund what we would consider core services of government. So this is virtually a 10-year plan to get to ultimately where we need to be in the final stage. I suspect that any significant tax restructuring would also be phased in over the course of time, and so I think the two could mesh quite well.
Do you think the $6 million is like a huge amount of money? But are you confident that A, the $6 million for 2013 will be there, and that the legislature will approve that, because none of the tax cuts will be in effect?
Well, obviously, I would say again that I believe that the legislature, both the House and Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, hold public safety as a core function of government. It's something that we all believe in and that we all support, theoretically, or at least in philosophy. And so if, as we begin the process of drafting the legislation, if it's understood that this is an opportunity for us to increase public safety, to improve outcomes, and to make better use of our resource, not only today, but over the long haul, I do think we have that opportunity, but ultimately it will be up to the body to decide.
Mr. Speaker, strategy 3A, provide a graduated approach to sentencing drug offenders. Should that be interpreted as implying some statutory changes to sentencing law?
I'll let Marshall speak to the concept, and then I can speak to what may come of that.
This is an area we looked at in depth as we tried to address the growth in the prison population due to the increasing beds required by the 85% population of worst offenders coming into your system. As we talk with district attorneys, as we talk with treatment providers and those working on probation, we find that the majority of drug offenders are diverted from prison. And those that are coming into prison are, generally speaking, those that have several felony convictions in their history. And so the question is, how do you structure the system to actually get better outcomes on the first conviction or on the second conviction, and so that the population coming into prison for the third or fourth time is reduced. At the same time, in order to do that, the current statutes with regard to drug possession are almost a one-size-fits-all policy, whereas what you're doing in practice, when we look at actually where people convicted of these crimes are going, many are put on district attorney supervision, many are put on DOC probation, many are put into drug court or community sentencing. There's a wide continuum of sanctions that district attorneys and judges are using to sanction these types of offenders. But that's far removed from what you're doing, what your statutes dictate. And so this policy was to suggest perhaps bringing statutes in line with current practice much more so.
Mr. Clinton, you mentioned a target of reducing violence by 10% by 2016. Can you elaborate a little bit on what initiatives or what tools is required to accomplish that?
Sure. In the same way that a lot has been learned over the last 20, 30 years in corrections and how we actually reduce criminal behavior when someone's actually been sentenced to a term of probation or imprisonment, policing and what we know works to actually deter and prevent crime has also evolved greatly over the last 20, 30 years. Both approaches revolve around focusing on the people and places that contribute the most to crime and are the most likely to be places where are people that at high risk of reoffending. We know through efforts from New York to LA and other cities, when you talk to police chiefs across the country, the thing they're focused on is, do I have the data about where crimes are occurring? Do I have the analysts to take that data and turn it into a patrolling strategy, put our officers where they can be most productive and most likely not just apprehend an individual, but to be at a place where crime is going to occur in order to deter that crime from occurring. It's obviously much more cost effective to be able to prevent and deter crime, especially violent crime, than to simply just respond to crime and all the costs that are associated with it, not the least of which is victimization. And so it's those kinds of data-driven hotspot policing, problem-oriented policing strategies that research has become clearer and clearer over the last 2 decades are ways, in fact, that police can reduce crime. Those are the types of strategies that, in talking with chiefs from around the state, especially those in urban areas, they're interested in pursuing. A lot of their efforts to date have been supported by grant funding, either federal grant funding or other funds that have been diminishing in recent years. The purpose here is to discuss the ways in which the state can support those efforts to make better use of existing local resources to fund police.
Mr. Speaker, the funding, the $6 million FY 13 million through FY 25, is that on top of what we spent now, or?
Initially, the $6 million until the potential proposals would be implemented, I think that would be an additional cost. However, if the proposals are implemented and the results are what we believe they will be, it'll actually be redirecting, identifying savings, and then reappropriating existing dollars within the current appropriation.
Just add to that. when we look at where you're at, where you're headed, the baseline you have to use is what your current policies dictate your prison bed needs will be. And so you're really at a crossroads. And the choice you're facing is, if your current policies remain in place, you are on a path to need to spend $259 million in additional cumulative spending over the next 5 years. This plan puts you on a path to spend much less than $110 million in reinvestment, plus another $10 million in additional spending on corrections, above current spending. And so either plan you are on is going to require additional dollars, given the policies that you have in place.
Building
This
exactly
proposal-
on that, the excellent question, that in Texas, what was the time frame where they started to capture the dollars? Was it about 2 years, 2.5 years?
Similar to Texas, they had on they were facing a baseline that would require them to spend $660 million and add 17,000 prison beds over the next 5 years. In the same way, you're facing the need to add about 2,500 additional beds for the growth of the 85% offender population over the next 9 years. By not pursuing that path, by adopting policies and changing funding strategies in Texas, they were able to avert $440 million otherwise being spent.
What I'm driving at is when was that in real dollars able to be seen and captured in the budgeting process? Was it about 18 months, 2 years? I may be not remembering that right.
It's realized immediately because the plan, if you do nothing, is much more expensive than the plan that you're putting yourself on to avoid.
I would just add in addition to that, I believe, if I have my information correct, this year in the state of Texas, for the first time in history, they're actually closing prison.
So with the $6 million during the first year in FY13, what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, it's the policy changes. It's the recommendations. And I want to say, not all of these recommendations may make it into law. I mean, it's going to be up to the legislature. We're going to start right away. In fact, we've already contacted our House staff and said, get ready. And we're going to start right away. We're going to continue to work with our working group, with all the stakeholders across the state, to ensure that we get policy in place that truly will address the situation and meet Oklahoma's needs moving forward. Marie, I hope that over the course of time, what we're going to see is a reduction in our violent crime rate. I hope that we're going to see crimes that are currently being committed not being committed in the future. I'm hopeful that we're going to see a bend in the trend on what we're currently spending on corrections and be able to make better use of our state's resources.
The governor not here. Have you spoken with the governor about it?
Yes, we have. She has been very involved and very supportive of the process. She's very interested and committed, as you all know, to increasing public safety, and we're fortunate to have her support.
Jones, if you talk about your occupancy right now, and when you, with these proposals, when do you think you'll see occupancy rate go down, and what happens if nothing?
The question is, when will I see
Your occupancy rate now in prisons, and then when do you hope to see it going down if these are implemented, and what happens if nothing?
Well, I think Marshall may have answered that along with the speaker. If nothing happens, we have a growth rate of, conservatively speaking, of a net 9% over the period of time that the study covers. If we implement all the policies, the growth rate goes from plus 9% to a net 2%. So I'm still going to experience growth. But I think the reinvestment dollars comes in the fact that you're looking at alternatives for what we consider lower risk offenders. You're looking at reinvesting dollars, but at the same time, you're still going to have correctional growth of at least a net 2%. And that's really reflective of violent crime rates, and it's reflective of offenders serving the 85% crimes. Now, the savings comes with improving public safety and reducing violent crime rate. You would, in fact, will reduce some of the 85% people coming into the system to start with, because the research is there that says if properly functioning, placing police officers in targeted areas and doing certain best practices with those police officers reduces that. So I guess to answer your question, I'm going to see a reduction in the potential growth
but not an overall reduction in my prison population. We're going to go, if all policies were enacted, we'd go from 9% projected growth to 2%. I hope that answers your question.
Maybe we have time for maybe one more question, two more questions. I was hoping for one. No one has. So if there's no other questions, I'll make this observation just on a personal note. Earlier in the press conference, maybe for the first time in my career, my mom and sister were here, and they've since left. So I'm not worried about that. Thank you all for being here.